50 people vanished on a calm crossing. But the worst part wasn't the number. The worst part was that only one person survived. And for 15 years, that survivor carried a truth so heavy it didn't just ruin sleep. It rewired reality. Now picture this. 2005, a deep-sea dive team drops toward the wreck of a passenger ferry resting at roughly 260 feet. The mission is routine on paper: survey, documentation, clearance planning. But the moment their lights cut through the black water, the case stops being a tragedy and becomes something else, because inside the main passenger lounge, the divers see a scene that does not belong to an accident. Bodies. Rows of them. And many are still buckled into their seats, not the way you'd expect in panic. Not random. Not messy. More like someone went down the rows, one by one, and did it for them. Then the divers check the emergency exits. And they're blocked. Not crushed by debris. Not jammed by swelling. Blocked like a decision. A deliberate, calm decision. That's when investigators realize they're not reopening a shipwreck. They're reopening a crime scene. The ferry was called the Northern Star. Spring, 1990. It left Seattle, headed for Victoria, British Columbia, a route people took like they took a habit. 4 hours. Usually calm water. An experienced crew. On board, 50 passengers. Families. Tourists. A few employees tied to port operations. And one man traveling with private protection. Nobody aboard knew that only one person would come back. And that the one person who came back would spend the next decade and a half living like every sunrise needed an alibi. Back then, the official story was clean and easy. Storm, engine failure. Chaos. Panic. Tragic loss. It was the kind of explanation the public accepts because it's familiar. The only problem is this: according to archived weather records, there was no storm that night. Not the kind that swallows a ferry whole. Not the kind that turns an organized evacuation into a nightmare. No storm. Just water. And silence. For 15 years, the Northern Star stayed on the seafloor. Fishermen avoided the area, not because they believed in curses, because the place felt wrong. Too quiet. And too quiet is usually a sign someone worked hard to keep it that way. Then comes 2005. The reason for the dive is practical. A development plan. New terminal upgrades. New routes. New money. But money has a way of shining flashlights into places people prefer to keep dark. The divers descend. And within minutes, they confirm something that makes every accident theory wobble. The passenger lounge isn't chaos frozen in time. It's order. A grim, controlled order. Seatbelts fastened. Exits blocked. And the pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. The reopened case lands on the desk of Detective Laura Mitchell. 43. 2 decades in investigations. A woman with the kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from seeing what humans are capable of, and deciding you'll still do your job anyway. She pulls the old case files. And one name keeps showing up like a watermark: Evan Carter. A ferry attendant. The only survivor. In 1990, search crews found him 3 days after the sinking. Drifting on a life raft about 30 miles from the presumed wreck site. Dehydrated. Hypothermic. In shock, and telling a story that was, oddly smooth. Too smooth. Like a script. Laura finds an interview from a Coast Guard rescuer recorded years later. The man doesn't sound superstitious. He sounds annoyed at himself. He says he didn't look like someone who fought the ocean for 3 days. He was too composed. And even when he was delirious, he repeated the same version of events word for word. We called it shock back then. Now I think he was rehearsing. Laura sits back and lets that land. If he was rehearsing, he expected an audience. And if he expected an audience, he expected to live. She goes through the crew list. The captain, Daniel Wolfe, 55. A career mariner. The type people describe with respect, he could steer a ship through hell. But Laura finds something the 1990 reports barely touched. Captain Wolfe had debt. Serious debt. And after the sinking, his family received an insurance payout, about $250,000. Laura tracks down the widow's recorded statement. A woman named Emily Wolfe. Her voice trembles in the old audio. She says, the week before that trip, he barely slept. He would sit at the kitchen table and stare straight ahead. Then he told me, if something happens, you and the kids will be taken care of. And, he cried. He never cried. I knew he knew. That alone doesn't prove murder. But it proves fear. And fear points somewhere. Laura requests the ship's log. The archive tech brings the binder in. And Laura's stomach tightens understanding the joke before she even opens it. Pages for the day of the sinking are missing. Torn out cleanly. Someone didn't want a timeline. Someone didn't want decisions on paper. The last intact entry is from the day of departure. A note from the chief engineer about irregular readings in the engine room. The chief engineer was Andrew Peterson, 38. A safety-first technical obsessive. The kind of guy who would inspect a fire extinguisher like it's a personal relationship. Crew statements mention a loud argument a week before the trip. Peterson pushed for repairs. Management didn't want to spend. The captain sided with management. And now Laura asks herself a question that makes powerful people uncomfortable. What if the captain sided with them not because he agreed, but because he was already trapped? The 2005 mechanical examination of recovered parts delivers the next blow. The engine didn't simply fail. There are signs of deliberate interference. Bolts loosened. Gaskets cut. Small sabotages that add up to one big outcome. An accident you can schedule. Laura pulls up Peterson's records. After the sinking, he resigned. Within a year, he started a marine engine repair business. And the business took off, fast. Laura circles a question in her notes. Where did the startup money come from? Then the passenger manifest gives her a problem she can't ignore. The official count was 50. But the port archive manifest lists 51. One name handwritten at the bottom. A private security contractor assigned to protect a passenger. And the security contractor's last name matches the survivor's last name. Same name. Same route. Same night. That's not a coincidence. That's a thread. Laura requests whatever old dock footage exists. It's grainy. 1990 technology, meaning the past hides behind static, but it shows enough. Right before departure, a truck backs up to a cargo access point. Several crates get moved into the ferry's lower hold. No standard registration. No full inspection documentation. And the truck bears the logo of a chemical supply company. Laura tracks the company. And finds a detail that turns suspicious into motive. The company filed bankruptcy 1 month after the sinking. And the financial trail shows a large payment to Andrew Peterson the day before the trip. Through a shell entity. Not a bonus. Not a salary. A payoff. So now Laura has a picture forming. Illegal cargo. Pressure. Debt. Sabotage. But none of that explains the seatbelts. None of that explains the blocked exits. And none of that explains why, down in the lounge, the bodies look less like victims of panic. And more like victims of control. Then Laura finds the passenger who might have been the real reason for everything. A man named Victor Langley. Traveling with his wife and 14-year-old daughter, Maya. Langley was a key witness in a port corruption investigation. His testimony could have buried several officials. And in the documents Laura reviews, both the captain and the engineer appear in the wider orbit of that same corruption network. Laura circles Langley's name. Then she circles the handwritten security name again. If a security guard was assigned to Langley, where is the guard's body? The divers identified 49 passenger remains. That leaves one unaccounted for in the count. Laura gets a call from the dive team. One of the divers sounds like he's trying to speak without waking the dead. He says, "Detective, the captain isn't in the bridge. He's in the lounge. Buckled into a seat, like the passengers. And he has a head injury. This doesn't look like a sinking. This looks like someone killed him and put him there." Laura goes very still. If the captain was dead before the ferry went down, who was on the radio? Because in the archives, there's a recorded transmission from Captain Wolfe requesting permission to return, citing engine trouble and worsening weather. But there was no storm. Laura compares that recording to a separate interview Captain Wolfe gave a month before the trip. The voice is close, but not identical. Analysis suggests only partial match, which points to something chilling in its simplicity. Someone was imitating the captain and steering the situation while the real captain sat buckled among the victims. Laura schedules a re-interview with Evan Carter. He shows up quickly. Too quickly for someone who claims he's been haunted for 15 years. He sits down and performs the right kind of fragile. Hands restless. Voice shaking at the appropriate moments. Eyes glossy, just enough. Laura doesn't argue. She asks one clean question. In the manifest, there's a private security contractor with your last name. Is he related to you? Carter's face drains color. And the reaction is a little too dramatic, like his body remembers a cue. I don't understand. I was in shock. I've lived with this for 15 years. Laura places a photo on the table. A headshot pulled from a security agency archive. Have you ever seen him? Carter stares. His hands start to tremble, not performatively now. Actually. He looks like my brother, Carter says. But my brother died in a car accident in 1989. Laura asks the question that cracks good lies wide open. Was the casket open? A long pause. No, they said the injuries were too severe. Laura nods slowly. Because now she has a new possibility. Not just a link. A swap. She calls the agency. She learns the security contractor did have a younger brother. But in the personnel file, it's the younger brother who was recorded as the one who died in 1989. Meaning the dead brother story might be a reversed identity. Or a cover. Or both. Laura goes to see Andrew Peterson. He greets her with guarded politeness, like a man who's lived long enough with a secret to hate every knock at the door. Laura lays out what she knows. Captain dead before sinking. Engine tampered with. Illegal cargo. Exits blocked. Seatbelts fastened. And Peterson breaks. Not like a movie villain. Like a man who thought he was doing a small bad thing for a big reason. And then realized he sold a match to an arsonist. I loosened bolts, he admits. Just enough to force a return. I didn't think anyone would die. I needed money. My daughter needed treatment. They offered it if I helped move the shipment. Who offered? Laura asks. Peterson swallows. There was a guy. He came with the cargo. Helped with loading, said he'd be on board to oversee delivery. Describe him. Early 30s. Dark hair. Average height. Confident. Cold eyes. And he gave a name. Peterson says the name. And it's the same handwritten name at the bottom of the manifest. Laura returns to her office and orders comparisons. Facial analysis between Evan Carter and the security contractor. The match is devastating. Even allowing for age changes, the likelihood suggests same person. Which means Evan Carter, ferry attendant, may not be Evan Carter at all. He may be the security contractor. The older brother, a man living as someone else. Laura pulls DNA from preserved 1990 evidence and compares it to the present-day survivor. The result comes back, no match. The person who lived is not who he claimed to be. Laura signs the arrest warrant. A team goes to Carter's address. The apartment is empty. No struggle. No mess. Just a single envelope on the table. Plain. No return address. On the front, written neatly, for Detective Laura Mitchell. Inside is a letter. A calm letter. The kind of calm that tells you the writer doesn't feel fear. Or guilt. Or urgency. Laura reads. You figured it out, but you're 15 years late. Yes. I'm the older brother. My younger brother died in 1989. He was destroyed by lies. A false accusation turned him into a headline and a punchline. He couldn't survive the shame. The man who helped paint him as a monster was Victor Langley. So I decided to correct the story. I joined security. I trained. I waited. Laura feels the temperature in the room drop as she keeps reading. Because the letter stops sounding like a confession and starts sounding like an instruction manual. The night before departure, I killed the real security contractor and took his documents. I killed the captain about an hour after launch. I called him below deck to inspect the cargo. One strike. Clean. Quiet. I dressed him. I placed him in the lounge. Buckled in. Like the rest. I returned to the bridge. I used his voice on the radio. From the chemical shipment, I made a gas. Not designed to tear bodies apart. Designed to turn resistance off. I released it through the ventilation into the passenger lounge. People didn't panic. They simply went still. Then I walked the rows and buckled every seatbelt. I blocked the exits. I left one path for myself. I changed back into the ferry attendant uniform. I injured myself enough to look credible. Then I went overboard with a raft. 3 days on the water gave me plenty of time to rehearse my story. When they found me, I was the perfect victim. Laura reaches the part of the letter that makes her grip tighten. Because he mentions the girl. Maya Langley. 14 years old. I hesitated. I almost stopped. But then I thought, she is the daughter of a man who killed my brother. I released the gas. That's the moment Laura understands something important. This was never justice. This was power. This was the satisfaction of deciding who breathes and who doesn't. And doing it calmly. The file becomes a final report. Identity established. Mechanism documented. Motives outlined. But the ending is the worst kind of ending. Unknown location. Minimal chance of capture. Because he wasn't preparing to escape a crime. He was preparing for a life afterward. A year later, Laura receives a postcard. No return address. A sunset over water. A lonely sailboat. On the back, one line, justice is subjective. But the ocean remembers. The postmark is smeared. Country unclear. And Laura does what investigators do when they can't stop a nightmare from existing. She tries to understand the mind that created it. A forensic psychologist reads the letter and says something that lands like a verdict. He doesn't regret it. He believes he's righteous. That's moral insanity, building a private value system where revenge is truth and mass murder is balance. Laura leaves the office and steps into ordinary city air. Cars. Traffic lights, people with groceries. Normal life. But for the first time, she notices how often the world runs on trust. How many doors stay unlocked? How many faces look away? Because somewhere out there, a man exists who calmly buckled sleeping people into their seats. And called it meaning. And if you ever stand near the water on a foggy night, and you think you hear voices, do one thing. Don't listen too hard. Because sometimes the past doesn't ask to be rescued. Sometimes it just reminds you, monsters don't always roar. Sometimes they sign paperwork, practice their tone, and float away like they belonged to the sea.